Hello and welcome to For Future Generations, episode 15. I am Jeffrey, and I am joined as always by my brilliant co-host Sean. Sean, how are you, man?
I'm good. It's a good Lord's Day.
All right, it is the Lord's Day, and I've neglected to mention it, but it is May 11th. It is Mother's Day, so if you have not yet sent your mother a Happy Mother's Day text or called her, maybe you should go do that before you get in too much trouble. But speaking of getting in trouble, we have with us tonight Michael Hunter. Michael Hunter, how are you, man?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, glad to have you. So, man, things have been interesting for coming up on 2 years now. Things have been really less than pleasing to a lot of people, and unfortunately, a lot of people very badly heartburned about a lot of the things going on. But it looks like there might be some light at the end of the tunnel. There might be some resolution. But before we get into that, just wanted to ask you, for those who aren't familiar with you and what you've been going through, could you give us just kind of a brief explanation? Who is Michael Hunter? Who are you? Where are you from, etc.?
I was born and raised in Kernersville, North Carolina. I grew up in a Christian family. I actually went to a dispensational Baptist church for much of my life. Originally, I was christened in the Methodist church, but we ended up moving to a dispensational Baptist church. And then sometime in high school, I was introduced to the Reformation and the Reformed faith by my history teacher. And from there, I believed that I was called to ministry and I wanted to pursue seminary. I went to Wake Forest for my undergrad. I double majored in ancient Greek and philosophy in preparation for seminary and that career path. And then after I graduated from Wake, I decided to strengthen my knowledge of languages by going to Oxford, and I did my master's in Greek and Latin there. And then I came back to the U.S. and pursued the MDiv at Westminster Seminary. And then after that, I jumped into the PhD program there, but came back to North Carolina in 2020 and started attending Covenant of Grace. I'd actually attended Covenant of Grace. It was the first Presbyterian church of which I was a member when I was an undergrad. So I left the Dispensational Baptist Church, and my parents did as well, and we ended up joining Covenant. And there, of course, I met my pastor, Eric, and lots of the faces that continue to be there over the next 10 years. But then when
just real quick,
Sure.
what year would this have been when you first went to?
So
Grace?
I first went in 2014.
Okay.
I was finishing up my undergrad career and at Wake, and I joined Covenant there. And I'd been, again, a Presbyterian by conviction for some time, but had not been willing to leave the church that I had grown up in.
Yeah.
And so ended up going to Covenant in 2014. Then, like I said, moved away to Oxford and then to Philadelphia. When I was in Philadelphia, I transferred my membership for a period to the OPC, and then came back here in 2020 and rejoined Covenant. When I came to Covenant, the session strongly urged me to pursue first a pastoral internship and the eldership, which I did. And then they urged me to pursue ministry there. And so I pursued my ordination process or the ordination process in 2022, took the ordination exams. And then in February of 2023, I was ordained and installed as the associate minister at Covenant. And so that, of course, brings us to the year that events began to unfold, leading us to.
So what year would it have been that you were installed at Covenant?
I was ordained and installed in 2023.
In 2023.
Yeah,
Okay,
February of 2023.
So it's within a year.
Yes.
After that, all of this kind of goes down.
That's right.
Okay, so you were a member there for coming up on 10 years. You had been now. I'm not a Presbyterian, so I might get some of these terms wrong. Were you an elder or were you a minister? Kind of, what is the distinction to be made there?
Sure. So in the ARP, it's a three office view. So you do have deacons, elders, and then ministers. We don't
Mhm.
use the language really of ruling elder and teaching elder, but um, in the ARP, I was an elder first at Covenant. So I was ordained as an elder in, I believe that was the beginning of 2022. And then throughout 2022, I pursued, again, ordination exams, completed those. And then I was ordained as a minister in February 2023.
Okay. All right. So minister would be similar to, as it were, in like the OPC, a teaching elder as opposed to a ruling elder, kind of that
That's
similar.
that's correct. Yeah, that's as far as they map onto each other. Yes, in other Presbyterian denominations, I would have been effectively considered a teaching elder.
Okay. All right. And who was the elder of Covenant of Grace at the time, and is he still an elder right now?
Well, so there were actually we had several elders when I first arrived, and of course the senior pastor there continued to be the pastor with me throughout this entire ordeal, and both of us ended up leaving. Both of us were investigated, and he's of course still a very good friend of mine. But he was there as minister, and then we had several elders, one of whom left earlier in this series of events than we did. He actually objected to one of our pastor's sermons on Christian nationalism, using the language of Christian nationalism. He objected to this, and so he ended up resigning from the eldership and leaving the church.
What year was this when he left?
This was early in 2024, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
And so this was early in 2024, and he had objected to, again, just the language of Christian nationalism coming from the pulpit. And so he ended up resigning the eldership and leaving the church. The couple of the other elders continued to be there, and they were the elders with whom we had, and we can get into some of the details of this, but with whom we had a particular problem. Those elders currently are still at Covenant. One of the elders that we brought on, who was tremendously helpful and supported us. Again, I would note that during this whole ordeal, we actually had a majority of the session in agreement. So it's not like we were trying to kick against the authority of the session or a majority vote.
Yeah, it was not a hostile takeover.
Yeah, so it was two ministers and an elder versus two other elders is basically what it came down to. And the elder who supported us, he had been installed as elder relatively late last year. In fact, not long before all of this sort of blew up. And he, of course, when the Presbytery decided to step in the way that it did, he decided to leave the church. And so now he is an elder at Piedmont Presbyterian, where Michael Spangler is the minister.
Okay.
Nice.
Cool. Yeah. So, now, so one thing to differentiate for the people who haven't been taking along. So Covenant of Grace, which is your old church.
That's right.
What denomination is that church?
It's an Associate Reformed Presbyterian Church.
So Associate Reformed Presbyterian Church, also known as the AO...
The ARPC.
the
ARP, yeah.
Right. Yeah, not the AARP. You can be
I was
young.
just thinking
that's a common joke they get. Of course, it makes sense given that the average age of a congregant, I believe, is 65. So
yeah.
No
so
way.
And Michael Spangler, though, he is PCA, right?
Well, no, he was in the OPC, and the OPC, divested him.
Right.
What they call divestiture. He lost his they removed his credentials without censure, and
is he now not officially tied to a denomination? Is that kind of where he's at right now?
Right. So he moved from the OPC to the FCC briefly, and then when he started, there were troubles in his FCC church. he decided to come to covenant, asked to come to covenant, and again, he was very gracious about it. He wanted to. He knows that a lot of people hate him, and so he asked me, and I told him I would take it to our senior pastor. I did. The senior pastor was fine with it. Then Michael presented himself before the session just to make sure it was okay, because he didn't want to cause any trouble, rock the boat at all. And so he sat down. He arrived in July of last year, and he presented himself to the session. He, in fact, had a couple of private meetings with one of the elders, and one of the elders who ended up opposing us. And they were fine with it. They were fine with him worshiping with us. They were fine with him taking the membership class. It was only in September when things became an issue. Right.
Now, so there are kind of two, as it were, inciting incidents that kind of sparked this whole thing off. One was, a White Boy Summer video in September of 23.
Correct.
But that seems to have kind of died down, been resolved, seemingly resolved, until the advent, as it were, of Michael Spangler. When he shows up, then it kind of brings these things that have been rumbling in the background to the fore, as it were. You, being the person who was there, would you say that's a correct way of describing that?
It is. So as far as I was concerned, when the White Boy Summer video issue arose in September of 23, again, one of our deacons was very upset with the content. Of course, I think part of the issue surrounding all of that was he was heavily influenced by Doug Wilson. And of course, Wilson was at the time taking aim at some of that rhetoric and the way that the discussion online and on social media was going. And so he took issue with my posting that video, and the session adopted a policy that, effectively ministers or officers could post, as long as they weren't violating the standards of the church, they were free to post on social media without repercussion. The session wasn't going to tyrannically police everything that we posted. Again, as long as it wasn't a clear violation of our oath and our standards.
Of course.
And this was in the context of a discussion about this particular situation. So the video, they were fine. They didn't, a lot of them, found it distasteful, didn't like it, but it was not something that they said, well, you've got to remove that. That was fine. You can do that, and we're not going to take any kind of action. And so then we had an emergency meeting with the deacon. And in that meeting, it was explained to him, of course, I had not removed the video. It was explained to him that, yes, I had voluntarily disassociated my account from the church's account, but we were free to post that sort of thing. And he accepted that. He was okay with it. He extended to me the right hand of fellowship, and that we're going to move forward as brothers, and you don't have to agree with everything I post, but we can post those sorts of things. It's fine.
Yeah. Now this might seem like this might seem like an unimportant aspect, but you refer to the fact that you extended the right hand of fellowship. Y'all literally shook hands over this, didn't you?
Correct. And actually, he was the one who initiated to shake my hand. So he was willing to put it to bed, and he extended his hand to shake my hand. I shook his hand in front of the session, and that was that. And I took that as...
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how the law works in North Carolina, but in Texas, a handshake is a legally binding obligation. Now, I know that state law doesn't necessarily inform church law necessarily, but for somebody to shake hands and say, "Yeah, this is done, we're good," this is a resolved issue. And then some 7 months later, to bring it back up again and relitigate the issue, not with more info, like the topic hasn't changed. It's the same issue relitigated. Correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't that what happened?
Yeah. So it was, again, the principle seemed to be that he was accepting what the session had decided, that yes, we can post those sorts of things, and we can still move forward as brothers. And between then and September, we didn't have any issues. He was perfectly friendly. He had been over to my house. I had been over to his. And I thought that, okay, this is fine. In fact, he came up he was nominated to be an elder, and we voted in favor of that. I did mention to the session at the time that I did have in the back of my mind concerns that, okay, is he really going to let this die and put it to bed and, agree that, okay, we shook hands, we've moved on. And I did have a concern in the back of my mind, and I expressed that concern to the session at the time. But barring that reservation, I said I'm fine with him, being an elder. And he ended up not being ordained as an elder because that was the point at which, when everything blew up, he left the church. But yeah, the next event to occur in September of 24 was my fellow pastor had posted a White Boy Summer video. And the deacon did not like that at all. He sat down with my fellow minister, and my fellow minister decided just not to be a stumbling block to remove it. He believed he had a right to post it, but he did not want to be an unnecessary stumbling block, so he removed it. But it was then that following Sunday that the deacon started talking to some of the elders privately about not wanting the Spanglers to be attending our church. And so it seems to have been woven into all of this that he saw it as all of a piece, that, I need to challenge the video. I need to challenge the Spanglers attending because I don't like, what's happening here. So.
Can I want to ask a question about the session, because I am not super familiar with Presbyterian levels of authority. Sure. So session refers to what level?
It's the most local level. So the session is the body that governs the local church, and then above the session is the presbytery, and then above the presbytery is what in the ARP is referred to as the synod, general synod.
Okay, so would you say that like meeting with the session is like what we might call a members meeting? Or is it just like the leadership? It's
just leadership. So it's not like it's not congregational ruled. So it's not like meeting with all the members. This was, Michael meeting with the elders and the two pastors, and he wanted to make sure it was clear with the leadership that he was not here to cause any problems, and wanted to make sure they were okay with him worshiping there.
So this is all very in-house at that point. That you had posted that video the first time.
I posted it back in 2023, and then that was dealt with again within the session. And then when Michael first arrived in July, it was dealt with initially within the session. And then, of course, everybody knew, people were fairly friendly to him, and he was coming and with his family and worshiping on Sundays and sitting toward the back, and there was no problem until again September.
Okay.
So what was the charge that was brought against yourself? So, we've kind of been referring to some of the drama that's around this, but there must have been an inciting incident. There was a man who was brought up to be an elder. He said, "I won't be an elder unless you do X, Y, Z." And what were his demands, and what was done about that?
Right. So the deacon who had been nominated for the eldership and who had the problem with the White Boy Summer video, had the problem with the Spanglers attending, he communicated to the session that via the senior pastor that he had two demands. One was we needed to preemptively to bar the Spanglers from membership in our church.
And at this point, they've been coming for a while already, right?
They had been coming. That's right. They had been coming. This was September, and they had been attending since early July.
Mm-hmm. So he didn't bring this up when they started attending. No. He brought it up when he was potentially being moved into leadership. He says, "Okay, my, quid pro quo is if I'm going to be in leadership, these people have to be excluded."
That's certainly what it looks like.
Was there a vibe between Michael Spangler and this aspiring elder, or like was it just out of the blue when he said that?
Yeah.
Or
So again, other than I knew that obviously he had opposed the White Boy Summer video in 2023, so I knew he wasn't on board with all of this. But again, we had put that to rest. And
yeah,
as far as his relationship with Spangler was concerned, I had seen them interact, and they were both friendly to each other.
Mhm.
And so there didn't seem to be, to my knowledge, I knew that this deacon had read Doug Wilson stuff, and Wilson obviously not a fan of Spangler's, but there was no hostility. There was no sort of
No
open
open
confrontation,
hostility.
no open hostility, right? That's,
Yeah.
I guess,
So
the best way to
it
put it.
must have been some sort of boiling under the surface type of resentment, or
Yeah, it certainly seems to
something
look
of
that
that
way.
sort.
It certainly seems to look that way.
Hmm.
And so he had made the demand that we had to bar them from membership without an interview. And the idea was the Spanglers at that point had already gone through the membership class. The elders knew that they were going through the membership class. Of course, my pastor and I knew that they were going through the membership
Hmm.
class, and even members did.
Yeah, yeah.
And
It's
so
not like it's
it
some
wasn't
sort
out
of
of yeah,
secret.
it wasn't a surprise, right? So they had gone through the membership class, and yet they had not been formally interviewed for membership. And so that's where, again, this oddity arose, where he was wanting us to say, you all can't be members of our church, even though we haven't actually interviewed you about any of this. And in his mind, I think the idea was the timeline of the way things would have occurred, or the way he wanted them to occur, was he brought this up in the week before the Sunday that he and the other elder nominee were supposed to be ordained and installed, or in his case, ordained and installed. In the case of the other elder, installed. But so he brought this up the week before that Sunday, and so he wanted it to be the case that there would be the ordination installation that morning, and then we would have an emergency session meeting later that Sunday to vote on this and to say, yeah, they can't be part of the church. While he, of course, now was a member of the session and had the power to vote. And so, yeah, so basically, the first demand, or I guess request, if you want to put it politely, but his demand that if he was not going to leave, then they needed to be barred. The second condition, or the second demand, was that the session initiate proceedings against me.
Hmm.
And it wasn't, he never specified and said, you ought to charge him with X, Y, or Z. It was just, there ought
Right.
to be proceedings against me because of, something nefarious. And
Yeah.
of course,
Nebulous.
all of
Yeah.
this something that was terrible going on that he couldn't actually define. Now, we had conversations, and it was clear that he didn't like my views on particular issues regarding race. And one of those, I think it was the last conversation that we had, was I brought up Charles Hodge, and Charles Hodge's language in his 1849 article on emancipation. And I indicated that, well, you have solid, godly Presbyterian men like Hodge who are opposed to interracial marriage. And that doesn't seem to me to be a violation of orthodoxy if someone believes that. So if Hodge walked into my church, I'm not going to tell him he can't be a member
Yeah.
because he believes that. And
Yeah. There can be things that you disagree with somebody are not necessarily tests of orthodoxy or fellowship.
That's correct. That's exactly right. And so I wanted to make it clear that I don't see that as, I don't think Hodge and others like him who held this view, I don't think Machen was in gross violation of the Westminster Standards and should have been removed, certainly not from church membership. And so he asked where Hodge said this, and so I sent him the quote, and I explained precisely what you just said, that I don't want to put myself in the position of looking at all of my spiritual forefathers, a huge host of my spiritual forefathers, and say, you shouldn't have been in the church, right? You didn't belong in the church. And if you walked in my church doors today, I would preemptively bar you from membership because of those publications. I don't want to put myself in that position. That seems absurd to me. And so I suspect, of course, it seems that, at least in some general sense, his demand that the session initiate disciplinary proceedings against me, was on that basis.
And so he didn't make any statement about what these proceedings would be about.
Uh,
But seemingly, from what we can tell, it was about beliefs, not actions per se.
That seems to be the case. He did send a parting email to the session in which he accused the session of all sorts of things, not only regarding this, but regarding allegedly our excessive involvement or interest in politics. Because again, we were preaching Christian nationalism, we were preaching the lordship of Christ over the nations,
Mm-hmm.
and that this has real world implications. And some folks were uncomfortable with that. Another issue was the gender issue, that we had established certain policies regarding women in public prayer, that policy was unpopular, particularly with some of the ladies in the church. And so he mentioned that as an issue. And it was almost like this parting shot where, again, other than the immediate discussion regarding race, he had not brought up any of that to the session or to us before. And so, why bring it up as you're walking out the door? But he was basically trying to paint a picture of, the church had changed dramatically in a bad direction and something needed to be done about this.
It's always it's always interesting when someone brings up like feminism, essentially, because you started by saying like, well, his big issue was like the white boy summer stuff. But if you scratch at it just a little bit, then it's like, well, we also don't like that you're saying that, we have standards for gender roles within the church. And sure. Like, it didn't, it seems like it just didn't take much for it to turn into that.
That was the bizarre part, because I was aware that when we started making after I was ordained and installed, and we started making certain changes at the church, for example, we were trying to conform more closely to the regulative principle of worship as we understood it. And so we moved the piano to the back of the church so that it didn't have a front and center location. And that upset some people. And then with regard to women in public prayer, I had been asked by the session to write a position paper arguing effectively for B.B. Warfield's position in his 1919 article that women shouldn't be praying publicly in prayer meetings and the like. And so I had written that paper. We had discussed it as a session at great length over a series of session meetings. And eventually we adopted the policy of only permitting men to pray in our prayer meetings. Well, again, that upset some of the ladies in the church, and they were quite disgruntled about that. But
now, when you say allowing the women to pray, you're not talking about being like, now you women, you better not be praying in your head.
No, of course not. Yeah, no. It's just as leading in public prayer, right? That we would have prayer meetings, and of course we would go around the room, and different people would pray, and of course we're gathered there as a mixed gendered group, and different people at different points are leading the prayers. And we made it a policy that in those kinds of prayer meetings that vocal public prayer was going to be male only. And again, upset some of the ladies in the church, but I didn't directly connect it to all of what was going on with, again, the race issues. I suppose conceptually in my mind, I understand that all these things are related because of egalitarianism, that whether we're talking about it's the the woke trident, it's the race issue, it's the feminism issue, it's the LGBTQ issue, that those things are tied together. I didn't realize how practically or concretely they were tied together in this situation until, of course, I saw that one of the elders' wives was very ardently pushing him against sort of me and Spangler. She did not like any of this, and she was going to be very vocal, and she was going to be vocal through her husband as well. And so I saw some of that going on. But then when the investigation, the latest investigation took place, and we can again talk about some of the timeline there, but in January of this year, after an extended investigation by the Minister and His Works Committee, where they had asked us a series of questions, and we answered. Minister in His Works didn't say, well, now we're recommending charges on that basis, or here these guys are unorthodox. They didn't find any of that. The Presbytery appointed individual investigators for me and my senior pastor. And when I was having my interview with that investigator, out of the blue, again, this whole thing was supposedly about the Michael Spangler coming to the church and all the issues surrounding it. Well, out of the blue, he asked if he could read me a comment that one of the elders who was opposing us had submitted, I believe, to Minister in His Works Committee. And in that letter, this elder was accusing me and my fellow minister of basically unilaterally shoving down the throats of the people in the church certain gender views about women in public prayer. And he even mentioned head coverings. We never had a policy on head coverings. And so he was accusing
Maybe you
us
should have.
Maybe you should have.
Yeah.
Maybe
Well,
should've.
but that's one of those things again where it's like, we I guess I could just say our guys in like the biggest umbrella kind of way, but we're always accused of like this Mott and Bailey thing where we put something out and then we're like, no, we're actually not, that extreme or whatever like that. But they're doing that with this kind of issue where it's like, well, no. Like the real issue is the regulative principle, or like it's just so bizarre to me.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I think in some ways that this actually moved, if I could put it this way, in a somewhat more honest direction, because of all the stuff regarding Spangler coming to attend the church or the race issues or whatever, there was really nothing substantive there. And so the moment they start investigating, they have to dig into this. What's really actually behind it? Well, it's exactly what that elder's letter indicated. The real issue behind all of this was certain ladies in the church were upset. And I can't testify directly, but I have it on some authority that that one of our former members at Covenant had spoken with a minister who was on the Minister in His Works Committee and was trying to understand what was going on and digging into exactly why they were doing what they were doing. And they had an extended conversation that basically it boiled down to this minister on the Minister in His Works Committee basically just admitted and said, certain ladies in the church were upset with certain things that had been done and said.
Yeah.
And that's what it really came down to.
The Longhouse has spoken.
It's the Longhouse. Yeah, it's the Longhouse, the shadow session, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So both Jeff and I are trying to figure out, we're not Presbyterians. What is the Minister in His Works Committee?
Okay, good. So the Minister in His Works Committee is a committee of Presbytery that, as the name suggests, deals primarily with the ministers in the Presbytery themselves. And so, for example, the Minister in His Works Committee, I sat before them when I went through the ordination process. And so they will handle issues like this. And so they were tasked when everything started to sort of blow up at Covenant. We disciplined 2 of our elders, and we can talk in a moment if you want about the reasons for that. But after disciplining those 2 elders, they, of course, news got out. This was going to their friends in the Presbytery. And so the Presbytery called for an emergency session or an emergency Presbytery meeting in October. And at that meeting, the Presbytery tasked the Minister in His Works Committee with investigating us to see if our views aligned with ARP orthodoxy. And so that's what they did. They sent us a series of questions, and there were actually 2 sets of questions. One set of questions dealt with the doctrinal issues, basically. We answered those, submitted them, of course, answered them separately, submitted them to Minister in His Works. I ended up posting those questions and my answers to them on X because they're doctrinal questions, and therefore they are by their very nature public. The church has no right to hide its doctrine and its doctrinal beliefs. They can't say, well, we're going to secretly over here ask you these questions to see if you conform to this orthodoxy, but we're not going to let people know out there that that's our standard for you being a minister.
Do you have some examples of those questions on hand, or would that be too much?
Sure. Actually, I know you said I have the windows open beforehand, but I'm going to pull this up real quick if I could.
Because we had talked, before the show, that some of the things of this story are so like hard to believe that we need just the concrete. How was this question worded? That kind of thing.
Absolutely. So I will. I'll pull this up, and here we go. So this is, of course, these questions and answers were republished on the Daily Genevan. So this works, but you can see the questions there. Some of them are very simple. They start out, have your views regarding the Westminster Standards and the Constitution of the ARP changed in any way since your ordination? No. Would you describe yourself as some variety of theonomist, so on and so forth? What do you mean when you use the phrase race realism? I don't know if you want to see any of these in particular, but a lot of them are asking me about what other people have said or believe. And so whether it's Pactum Institute or whether it's Michael Spangler or whether it's, whoever, they ask me about segregation, ask me about the curse of Ham.
For those who are just listening, he's showing like multiple paragraph answers to these questions, like very in-depth answers, like nothing pithy, very detailed.
Yeah. He's not trying to hide the ball here.
No. I mean, this is just very straightforward.
Right. Slavery. Ooh. That one was a particularly
slavery. Nice. Yeah. That's a very long one. Okay.
Yes, it is. I particularly enjoyed that
in there, maybe.
So there you go. Mm-hmm. More about, of course, questions on the Holocaust. Questions on the Jews.
Rep McAtee has said, quote, yeah. So
what does it say?
It's very interesting. A lot of these questions seem to be guilt by association.
Yeah.
It's like, this guy said this. What do you say?
So in fact,
and they're sort of begging the question. They're sort of presupposing, oh, well, these people said these things and they're bad. So you have to, I mean, it's not stated plainly, but it sounds like they're asking you to denounce, which is, a very dangerous game to play.
Right. And that was, if you look at and we won't go through the whole thing, but if you look at the investigator's report that was adopted and eventually became, that was the basis on which I was eventually charged. The investigator's report, that's basically their only argument. They themselves say that after the minister's works investigated, that my views had not changed since I was ordained. They expressly say that. They basically, it's guilt by association, that it was my associations that caused the dissolution at Covenant, and therefore I am to be held responsible.
So a lot of the guilt by association, just from us skimming through this, has to do with your involvement in the Pactum Institute.
That's correct.
Are there other ministers within the, I forget it, I forget the acronym.
ARP.
The ARP?
ARP, yeah. Are there other ministers within the ARP who are with the Pactum Institute?
Not that I know of, and okay. In fact, it's funny because it's the Pactum Institute itself. It's odd that played a role, I think, because I became a member of the Pactum Institute because I had gone before the Winston-Salem City Council last year, and I had preached a brief, basically 2-minute sermonette to the Winston-Salem City Council, calling them to repent for their support of the LGBTQ movement. And that was then posted on social media, and I was contacted by the head of the Pactum Institute, and he asked me if I wanted to, be involved. I could just use it as a platform to publish whatever. And he had indicated very clearly that it did not require me to sign any kind of statement agreeing to anything. And I ran it by my senior pastor, told him to look over it. He said, it seems fine to me. And so it was quite simply that, well, here are co-belligerents, here are people who were both against the LGBTQ movement. That's why I was asked in the first place. And it's a open venue to publish in the future if I wanted pretty much anything that I would like to publish that they would be willing to host. And so it was really so benign that it's odd that was even brought up. But.
Do you think there was any? Do you think there was any outside influence on the outside of your church and the Presbytery itself on this whole investigation and all that?
Do I think there was outside influence on the Presbytery?
Yeah. Well, it seemed like, if I have the timeline right, you eventually went in front of the Presbytery itself, right?
It did.
Okay. So do you think that there was something outside of that group that was outside of the ARP and all that was hey, you guys need to?
Yeah, and it's not clear to me. I mean, there were obviously voices in other denominations. There were voices from other presbyteries within the ARP who were very clear where they stood on all of this, and that wasn't going to escape the notice of the presbytery. And so I'm sure they were aware of those external pressures, but I don't think that accounts for their action. I mean, I think that they were terrified by all of this. And the moment they hear anything related to race or racism, their reasoning power just shut off.
Yeah, it's a bit of a boogeyman in our culture.
It is, right? The reasoning ability just shut off, and it became, we just need to attack this, and we need to deal with it by any means necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was no discussion, there was no debate about it, there was no sort of even curiosity regarding it, which, again, the investigators report, it's almost purely about guilt by association.
Yeah.
And
so were you getting up in your church on a Sunday morning and getting behind the pulpit and preaching about race and segregation and things like that? I mean, where did this come from?
Not once. And so so I never touched on these issues in a Sunday school class or from the pulpit. Neither had my fellow minister. The closest that I had ever come was, of course, prior to being ordained, toward the latter part of 2022, I had published a series of articles on natural communities where I deal with just some basic natural law issues and our relationships in our natural communities. And that was well received by many in the presbytery. And then in early 2024, I was asked to preach before Presbytery, and those articles provided the basis for that sermon, where I deal with basically the woke trident and egalitarianism in these areas. And again, that sermon was well received by the Presbytery. There were no critics. No one came up to me and said, how awful. And so I didn't see, there was no issue until, again, Spangler came to the church, and then this deacon made an issue out of it, and then it blew up from there. It's interesting, too, that the two elders who had opposed us, they wanted to charge me and my fellow minister, right? So they basically acted as though they were acting as profession when they weren't. But they sent us a letter toward the end of this whole affair at Covenant, before it got into the hands of the Presbytery. They sent us a letter on a Friday. Now, this entire week we had been dealing with the crisis in the church. We had been sending emails, and one of these elders in particular was being quite belligerent, and I was trying to ask him simple questions that would help deal with the issue at the congregational level, and he refused to answer. He just did not do it, and he ended up telling me in the final email, he said, "Michael, figure it out yourself." And at that point, my fellow minister stepped in, suggested that we have a meeting to reach a reconciliation before this went too far. I expressed a willingness to do that. The elder never responded. The following morning, on a Friday morning, those two elders sent an email to me and to my fellow minister with the clerk of Presbytery copied, and they were saying, these are the things that we're accusing you of doing, right? We want you to consider taking up charges against, session needs to consider taking up charges against you. And among the things of which we were allegedly guilty in their eyes was my natural communities articles. They wanted me to disavow in their entirety the natural communities articles. They wanted us to disavow in its entirety Christian nationalism, and they wanted us to disavow in their entirety Michael Spengler's articles on race. Now, again, these men were familiar with my natural communities articles and had been since 2022, before I was ordained. Nobody had objected. This was not an issue. And so it was really a pretext, and the evidence that it was a pretext is they said so. So we had in our emergency session meeting, which was the last time we met as a session, was after that Friday. We met on a Sunday afternoon, and that's when we ultimately disciplined those two elders for basically for contumacy, for trying to subvert the authority of the session. And during that meeting, I have never done this before, and I just knew where this was going. So I actually recorded it. So I have a recording of this session meeting. And the elder, one of the elders involved opposing us, he openly said, I don't care if you're right or if you're dead right if the church is dead. He said, I don't care about the doctrinal position. He said, whether you're right or wrong on that doesn't matter to me. The only concern that he had was with people leaving the church, and especially, of course, major contributors to the church leaving the church. And so if he could use that as a pressure point, he was going to say, well, you need to disavow the natural communities articles so that we can put these people's minds at rest, when he himself didn't see any issue with the orthodoxy of those articles.
What's crazy is it seems like every denomination is going through that right now. And I mean, I'm in the LCMS, so I talk with guys about this all the time. And the LCMS is just like, we need new pastors. We need young men who are going to, step up and they're going to be front and center in the culture wars. And they talk this big game about wanting these kind of guys. And then they kick those guys out any time they stand up any taller than anyone else. But I said just to say that it's across the multiple denominations in every church. It seems that everyone just wants to get rid of these guys, and they say they do it, even like I said, in the LCMS, because people will leave. If we don't get rid of these guys, people will leave, which is obviously not true. I mean, people follow these same people like on Twitter or on their podcasts or whatever. Like, people love all these guys that are getting kicked out of the church.
Yeah, it's a strange thing, because I think they're losing the battle on two fronts. One is, even if it were the case that a lot of people are going to leave, well, that's no reason to compromise on principle. And that's what my fellow minister and I were clear about, is that we're standing on principle here. Whatever may come, that's the safest route. And so we weren't willing to compromise, and we were effectively being asked to compromise. But again, the other side of this is, no, you shouldn't worry about the problem or the issue of membership in the long run. Yes, there are people who might leave, but look at your church. Again, the average age of a congregant in the ARP is 65. Young men, particularly Gen Z young men, are more right-wing than anybody else.
Yeah.
And that's a growing trend. And those young men are interested in the Christian faith. They're the reason why sales for Bibles have increased. And so you have a huge potential field ripe for harvest for Gen Z young men that they're welcome. And in fact, that's what we saw or started to see in the very brief time that I was there as associate minister at Covenant, is we got young men in the church who were wonderful guys. And guess what? They tended to be more right-wing. Mm-hmm. And that, actually, I had a meeting of a few older men, including another ARP minister, and then a bunch of younger guys. We had a total of roughly 17, 18 people in attendance. This was back in December, because I wanted to be clear that I wanted, at least this ARP minister, I wanted him to see what was going on. Because I think that a lot of these older ministers, especially if they're not on social media, they don't realize, they have no idea what the landscape is and what's actually happening. And so I think it was eye-opening, perhaps for him, and I think it was useful to all of us and encouraging for all of us to see, actually, there are a lot of young men who are in this same ballpark, at least.
Yeah, and it's not just like political things. I mean, some of it is even like the style of worship has been a huge battle in my circles, where you have these older people who are like, oh, we should go contemporary. Then the young people will want to show up. And it's like the young people are like begging for the most traditional, most high church, all the smells and bells that you can fit inside the room. I mean, it's really crazy that the elderly are kind of doing everything that the young people don't want them to be doing.
That's right.
I saw that in my local church, where people were kind of like, well, I don't know if we want to do this like very high liturgy and all this, and we might scare people off. Well, we went with it, and a pastor who wanted to do it, and now we have like a baby boom of young families. Awesome. Just in the time I've been there, it's just exploded.
Right, and I think again you're going to see this even across different denominational lines in its own way. So the commonality is the return to something like the core components of our tradition. So if you belong in a Lutheran circle or you belong in an Anglican circle, then a lot of the young people, I suspect, are going to want what you would describe as a high liturgy.
Yeah.
In a Presbyterian context, of course, we believe in something very different. We go the regulative principle of worship direction, and so everything becomes very, very simple. But again, that's part of our tradition. It's not the contemporary, the move toward the contemporary. And so in both cases, despite different traditions here, it's still a yearning for, okay, our fathers in the faith surely had some better sense of what was going on than we do. And so actually, let's explore that instead of trying to constantly reinvent the wheel. And certainly, we don't want all the elements of modernity to enter into worship. That's something that's repulsive, I think, across the board.
Well, even like what you described there, I would still call that high liturgy, in that it's very serious liturgy.
That's right. Yeah, like, there's a solemnity about it, yes.
Yeah, people who are extreme, like regulative principle all the way. Like if I even see a guitar within 50 feet of the door, I'll kill somebody. Like but like it's serious, and I think that's what it is. People want. They want something that's very serious.
That's
and
it.
if you've ever gone in a room with a bunch of men and sang just a cappella hymns, or even if it was like exclusive psalmody or anything like that, it's powerful, and it's something different from anything you'll ever see elsewhere.
That's exactly right.
And that's what people are hungry for. But again, like there's this weird, I don't know if it's baby boomers or if it's like silent generation on their deathbed trying to just, we got to be hip.
Yeah.
It's like,
I heard somebody say this, and it's maybe a little bit too, maybe it's a little too harsh, but I'll repeat it because I think it's worth observing, which is his observation was, the baby boomers are trying to recreate Woodstock in the church, where, you have these emotional rock bands, you get together and you just kumbaya.
Yeah.
And the church was never designed to be Woodstock. It was something meant to take itself seriously, discussing serious doctrine, serious life or death issues every single week. And when you go into, ever since that kind of parallel was pointed out to me, anytime I see a modern church with the rock band and the pastor in the skinny jeans with the, bedazzled rear end on them, you know, you see the parallels there where they're trying to imitate this rock and roll kind of idea of, if it feels good, do it. And that feel good, do it kind of attitude just isn't going to be something that sustains the church long term.
That's right.
No. Well, you had said something about wanting to return to like something older, and I think that when we talk about things being connected, my first thought when you said it was like the return, but like the U is a V, like it's a Roman thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Like everything is that right now.
That's right.
Like because I remember seeing this. It was like a online cartoon type thing, and like a panel cartoon, and it was essentially this guy that was like walking down the street, and like everything's just like dirty and like nothing sacred, and then like the last panel is like it's almost like I hunger for something sacred, and then there's like a church at the end of the street that's like lit up and stuff, and that's what it like everyone, young people especially, we have this. I say we, but I'm 36. But there's this like return to everything that used to be in the best way, because we can acknowledge like, man, the way that the way Dad did things wasn't great, but the way that Grandpa did things, like that's where it's at, and it's all connected. Like we were talking about how everything's.
Yeah, and I think that's directly connected to the solemnity issue. It reminds me a bit of, without going into detail, if you've ever read the Napoleon of Notting Hill, Chesterton's The Napoleon of Notting Hill. And so if you want a picture of that, it's a very good picture of when everything becomes sort of a joke in this globalizing world, then you're eventually going to get someone who takes the old stories and the old way of doing things seriously. Mm-hmm. And they're going to want to bring that back.
You had mentioned, was it 2 elders being dismissed, or they left voluntarily? I didn't.
No, they were disciplined. Those were the 2 elders that, again, we had a majority control of the session in all of those events. And those were the 2 elders who eventually that Friday morning decided, again, you can see the timeline of events on X. I've included it there, but that one of the elders in particular had flipped back and forth from supporting us to opposing us to supporting us to opposing us, making all sorts of allegations and then retracting them. And he was all over the place. And then the other elder had not even been involved because he had been sick. So he hadn't been present at the church. And yet he was having all of these discussions behind our backs with members and not actually dealing directly with a session. And those 2 elders eventually tried to act as the session, as it seemed to us, and they brought these charges and they copied the clerk of Presbytery. Well, when you have 2 elders basically going rogue and trying to control and steer the direction of the session instead of
one of them was not present.
One of them wasn't present. The other one was flip-flopping all over the place, and both of them were acting against the majority of the session instead of submitting to it and saying, well, that's what the majority of the session has decided, so we're either going to accept that or we're going to resign. They wouldn't do either of those things. They wouldn't accept it and they wouldn't resign. And so they were actively trying to subvert the authority of the session while sitting on the session. And so we were forced, as we saw it, to discipline them for charging them with contumacy. And so we removed them from office. And we also, of course, disciplined the deacon who had started all of this at the same time and barred them from the table.
How many approximately members do you have at that church?
At the time, off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly how many we had on the membership roll. We would have on a good Sunday in the ballpark range of 80s to 90s attending on a Sunday morning. And then, of course, we had, as a result of this deacon leaving, and then, of course, spreading that message in the congregation, there was another family with whom the deacon's family was very close. In fact, the week before all of this had started in the church, before this, the week before the deacon brought all of this up, he had been in Tennessee visiting with this other family. And this other family they were still on our membership rolls, but they had moved for a job relocation. the wife, we later discovered, was sending out messages to women in the congregation, urging them to question the session and to seek counsel outside of the church, and sowing doubts about the session and what we were doing in our authority, when she had never come directly to us. And so she was sowing discord and dissension. And meanwhile, their friends, the deacon and his family, they were in our church and started this whole mess. And so we had the deacon's family left. Then another deacon who was close with that deacon, he and his family left. And then I think we had a couple others who again saw, they did not like the direction things were going, so they ended up leaving as well. But at the moment, I have no idea what their membership looks like. I know that it has declined significantly last time I heard, but I'm not sure exactly what it looks like.
Yeah. So to get back to the timeline, so you talked about the minister and his works committee. About what time was it that they opened their investigation of you, and what was the ultimate outcome of that?
So they were tasked with investigating us at the October emergency Presbytery meeting, and there was no face-to-face meeting. There were no extended discussions, again, anything of that sort.
October of 24?
October of 24, that's correct.
Right.
And they subsequently sent an email. They asked if I wanted to do the interview by email, or I think they offered like a Zoom meeting or something. And so I thought, well, it's best to have it by email so that I can actually write out thoughtful answers and they can know what I actually believe. And
also,
so,
a good paper trail.
A good paper trail, right? We want a record of it. And so they submitted the questions. Those are the questions we just looked at a moment ago. And they submitted those questions. I gave them those answers and later, of course, published them on X. They also submitted immediately after that another series of questions that dealt with the particulars of the events at Covenant. And those questions were, I have never released them, and I may at some point, I don't know, but those questions were leading questions, right? So it was basically assuming our guilt and asking us to explain how we thought we were guilty. Yeah. And so they sent that series of questions and answered those. Both of those, if I remember correctly, that was roughly, we received them in, I think, November. And then after submitting the answers, we never heard from the minister and his works committee again until, of course, the packet and the information came out before the January Presbytery meeting. And their recommendation, which was adopted by the Presbytery, was that although they had been tasked with determining our orthodoxy, and of all the committees, they should be best equipped to determine whether we were Orthodox or not. But they refused.
Their job.
That's their job, and they never answered that question. And instead, they kicked the can down the road, and they said, well, our recommendation is there's enough here that we should open an investigation. And so they appointed that in January. They appointed an investigator for me. They appointed an investigator for my senior minister.
So what were the grounds that they gave for this investigation?
Well, at this point, there had been no charges. There had been no particular accusations. It was just, we're going to keep investigating you because we believe that it's a vibe, right? There's something going on there.
This guy's got vibes and we want to look into it.
Now, I should mention that at the October Presbytery meeting at which they decided to investigate us, at that meeting, they overturned our censures that were imposed on the two elders and the deacon. They did so without looking at a shred of evidence, even though I had submitted the timeline along with corresponding evidence in a zip file to the moderator, to the clerk and the moderator. And the moderator determined that the Presbytery did not need to see that evidence. He unilaterally decided that the Presbytery should not have access to it. And so the Presbytery didn't have access to it. And yet they went ahead and made a decision to overturn our censures, again, without looking at any evidence. And then they opened an investigation into us. So yeah, that was how things went. And then, of course, in January, they appoint the investigators. And the investigator, he interviewed me, my investigator interviewed me, interviewed other members of the church. And eventually he created a report for the April Presbytery meeting. And on the basis of that report, he recommended that I be charged for basically, there were two recommended charges. One, that I was disturbing the peace, purity, unity, and prosperity of the church, which is vague, right? It's this general charge.
By doing what?
By doing what? And so
Yeah.
that was, right. And so the second charge,
it's like when you get arrested by a cop for resisting arrest. It's like, well, what is that? What's the charge,
Yeah.
though? It's like, you can't arrest me for resisting arrest when you don't have a charge to arrest me for.
Yeah.
And the other recommended charge was the publishing of opinions or the maintaining of practices that were either contrary to the light of nature or Christian practice, or however the confession words it, or the publishing of such opinions in such a way as to create, disunity, disturbing the unity, peace, prosperity of the church. Now, all of that second charge, so the first is vague, the second one is only for heterodox views. Mm-hmm. That's what it's for. It's specifically those views, opinions, or practices that are contrary to the light of nature or Christian conduct, basic Christian ethics. And yet the report itself says that my views, the orthodoxy of my views, was not in question. That was not even within the purview of the report.
Yeah, so you're disturbing the peace by being orthodox in your Christian beliefs.
I'll actually, so I'll share this, and you can see the language that they use in the report. And so
usually one would suppose that if you're being charged with, this charge which has to do with orthodoxy, holding to or proliferating heterodox views, you would expect, subline A to be heterodox view 1 is X, heterodox view 2 is Y.
Right.
But was there any of that?
Quite the contrary. The charges, recommended charges, were recommended on the basis of the investigator's report, which I'm about to read some of this in a second. And the investigator's report was in fact adopted by the Presbytery. They took this up as their official position. And not only does it not charge me with being heterodox, it accuses me of promoting orthodoxy and of, as they put it, elevating the confession above scriptural principles. And so let me read this. This is again a post from X, and the quotations are direct quotations from the report that was adopted. I'm charged with contributing, quote, to the collapse of good order and discipline at Covenant of Grace. The report identifies 5 main issues that were contributing factors to this collapse, followed by the 4 ways in which I'm allegedly at fault for these contributing factors. First, I'm allegedly guilty of contributing to the collapse of good order and discipline at COG because there was a, quote, a perceived shift of emphasis in the teaching and ministry at COG prior to the escalation of events in the summer of 2024 and coinciding with the call of Mr. Hunter's associate pastor. There appears to be a greater emphasis in the teaching and ministry focus of the church on the distinctives of Presbyterianism and Reformed theological perspectives, close quote. It goes on to say, the report acknowledges that this shift in emphasis, quote, was intended to strengthen the church's understanding of and adherence to the historic principles of Presbyterianism and Reformed teaching, orthodoxy, and orthopraxy, close quote. And then later again, it says, later the report says that among my pastoral actions that contributed to the collapse at COG and for which I am guilty is, quote, the elevation of confessional standards above scriptural principles, close quote.
So if their problem is with you elevating the confession above scripture, then their problem isn't actually with you, it's with the confession.
That would seem to be the implication, right? And that was actually the man serving as my advocate raised precisely that point. That are we to believe that the investigator is saying that the confession is at odds with his understanding of Scripture and scriptural principles, such that he does not adhere to our confession? Because that's what it starts to look like. It starts to look like that the Presbytery is openly saying that, yes, actually, we are not in favor of promoting our own confession. We think that there's a problem with it.
Really?
Wow.
That would seem to be the logical implication. Now, do they mean that if you press them on it? No. I think that they couldn't find anything. And so they have to say, oh, well, you were just being divisive because you were pressing these Presbyterian distinctives instead of being more broad-minded or whatever it is. But again, that's how liberals talk.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, the issue, I'm going to try to put the best spin on them talking about that they're saying you talk about, limited atonement too much or something like that, right? Like they're like, come on, get, just like regular gospel stuff.
Sure.
But the problem with that is like the distinctives we have in our denominations and just our confessions of faith. That's why we have different churches.
Yeah.
It's because you can't teach these just basic things without getting into distinctions. For instance, today, pastor was given a sermon that had nothing to do with baptism. Started talking about baptism because he's Lutheran. And that's what Lutherans do. We everything is baptism. So it like if anyone was offended by that, they would have to get offended at things that are 500 years old.
Yeah, and well, I mean, it's even just the issue of, okay, it shouldn't shock anybody that they're teaching Presbyterianism at a Presbyterian church.
Yeah.
It shouldn't shock anybody that they're teaching Lutheranism at a Lutheran church or whatever the case may be. You're in the wrong place. If you have an issue with that, then go to another church.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What are you doing as a member of a presbytery if you think that it's problematic or too divisive to be teaching the principles of Presbyterianism or teaching Reformed Orthodoxy and Orthopraxy or teaching the confession?
Mm-hmm.
That is madness.
In this town where Covenant of Grace is there not a PCUSA church for people to go to?
There is a PCUSA church. Actually, side story on that. So we were talking about the Woke Trident earlier. After, I was the admin on the social media accounts for the church. And after that whole situation again ended, and I was the week afterwards, before I was removed as admin or whatever, I was still getting the notifications. And again, this was just days after the Presbytery meeting had happened that week. And I happened to see a private conversation between one of the elders who had opposed us and the local PCUSA minister in a private chat. And the PCUSA minister was complaining about an X post that I had made where I used gay as a slur.
As a pejorative.
As a pejorative, right? And so I'd used gay as a pejorative, which is perfectly normal for a Christian. Yeah. And the elder who had opposed us said, he said, we're purging that influence from our church to the gay affirming PCUSA minister.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the PCUSA minister basically extended this hand of friendship and said, I would love to get to know you better and we can develop a friendship. And the elder came back and said, yeah, I would love to develop a friendship with you. It's like, are you crazy? You just got rid of your two ministers who were Orthodox, and now you're talking to a PCUSA gay affirming minister about one of those ministers and his pejorative use of the term gay.
Which is, again, goes back to the, return to tradition thing. Like, all young people are, actually, I will say, like, guys like my age love hearing young people call everything gay or retarded or whatever. You're right. Like, it's just, like, to not be able to use a clearly sinful lifestyle as a pejorative.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was the point of it. If somebody did something that was gay and you told them it was gay, well, I don't want to be sinning in that way. Right. Like I want to do the cool sin that, whatever. But anyways, that's a whole tangent.
Yeah.
It's just funny to me that, and then of course, anytime somebody talks about the PCUSA, I immediately think of, Redeem Zoomer, is that the guy's name? That's like all about the PC USA and they're going to take over. And it's just, I don't know.
There are some denominations that are ripe for the picking by young conservatives. The SBC is a perfect example of this. William Wolfe has this whole organization he's got together that's all about saving the SBC. Yep. and bringing conservatism back into the SBC. And I applaud him for that. He's actually doing what Redeemed Zoomer is LARPing at.
Sure.
Redeemed Zoomer, who is not a Six-Day Creationist, who believes that it's perfectly fine to have a female pastor, but he draws the line at sodomy. And it's like, well, guy, you're kind of late to the party, and you're riding the short bus all the way.
Right.
It's like there are some things that can be saved and some things that can't be saved. And when there are other good denominations that have infrastructure, if your argument is let's fight for the infrastructure, why are you going to the synagogue of Satan and trying to save them? Yeah.
I'm curious. You don't have to answer this question if it's like a weird doxing situation, but are you currently able to receive the means of grace at some other church, or is this something we should be on the lookout for you for?
No, this is I am, and this is of course not something that's private.
Okay.
So I'm now attending and receiving the means of grace at Piedmont Presbyterian Church, where Michael Spangler is the pastor, and my old elder is the elder there.
Nice.
And we did a complete. Of course, it's kind of funny, just the ironies and throughout all of this, but we did a complete flip because Spangler was for a time attending the church where I was minister. I was his pastor.
Yeah.
And I was de facto his pastor, and then I had this man as my elder who was supporting us, and then now of course the elder is still an elder, and now Michael is my pastor. So but yeah, so that's going well, and in fact they had been very involved in my trials and my dealings with the Presbytery throughout all of this. They wrote letters to the Presbytery effectively demanding that I be released and transferred into their care. And those letters, surprisingly, at the last meeting where I wasn't present and where I received censure, those letters were read out to the Presbytery, to the commission, and they did not directly place me in the care of Piedmont Presbytery, but they basically said it's unusual, but they basically said, okay, without any kind of motion, we're going to just put you in the care of the last ARP church that you attended, and then that ARP church presumably will transfer my membership over to Piedmont Presbyterian, which has already received me as a member.
Gotcha. So they're washing their hands of you, but at the same time they're giving themselves an out and also giving you an out at the same time.
In some ways, I mean, I think in the big picture, in the big scheme, I think that I couldn't have asked for anything better. Mm-hmm. I got, that's exactly what I wanted, was to be removed from office in the ARP, and I didn't want to pretend that was a legitimate court.
Yeah.
By showing up.
Speaking of not wanting to grace this court with your presence, so the ministry and his works committee then forwards their recommendation to what is it the Presbytery at large that they forward to?
So the ministry and his works committee, after their investigation, brought their recommendations to the Presbytery in January.
Mm-hmm. And then the Presbytery acted on that recommendation in what way?
The recommendation was that was the point at which they said, we need to investigate further, and they didn't have anything, right? So we need to investigate further. Basically, investigate.
We're going to look and look and look until we find something.
That's right.
Kind of like what's going on politically. Like we saw this with Donald Trump, where it's like, we're going to investigate him. We're going to investigate the investigation, and then we're going to investigate him for this. We're going to investigate him for that. Yeah. And people were calling him Teflon Don because all these investigations kept coming back with nothing except for recommendations to investigate further.
Right.
And we're seeing this right now in European politics with the AfD in Germany. They're being investigated by the political associations to see if they're far right. And the recommendation that the security services came out with was, well, we need to investigate further. they're not actually looking for truth. They're looking for, they're not planning to stop until they've got you.
That's right. They made up their mind already. They have already made up their mind that you are guilty of something, because there's this cloud of suspicion, and
There's these bad
vibes, right? Bad
Yeah.
vibes. And so that's what's going on. And so they decided to investigate further. They appointed the investigator, and then that investigator's report is, from which I read a portion of it a bit ago. That investigator's report was brought to the Presbytery in April, and the Presbytery adopted it. So after all of that investigating, that was the best that they could come up with, was that basically I'm guilty of dividing the church because I was teaching principles of Presbyterianism, because of my associations, because of these terrible associations that I had, and because of language that I had used on social media. And if you don't mind, I'll actually read from the report a few of the examples of my social media posts to which they objected.
Sure.
Because of course this was this was like living the meme moment where you're in the court trial and they bring up your memes and you're actually
you're in the docket and they're bringing up the memes and you're trying not to laugh.
That's right. So let me bring this up.
Just sitting there like, Judge, come on, that's a banger.
Exactly. Right?
We accuse you of this, and you're like.
So here it is. So what social media post does the report find problematic? The report says that some of my posts are, quote, juvenile, including the following from August 15th, 2024, where I say, quote, I've seriously wondered what woke seminaries do when a student has to read aloud the Greek text of Acts 13:1. Again.
Oh,
right.
I've been there. Yeah.
Right? Okay, that's, first of all, it's funny. Secondly, it's true, right?
Yeah.
If you're so governed by the spirit of the age that you can't pronounce the hard G and the hard R as the Greek demands.
And this is not you saying the N-word. This is you making a joke about people accidentally saying the N-word.
Right.
Well, no, they would have to. They would have to if they pronounced it right.
If they pronounce it correctly.
Standing up and calling a bunch of people N-words in a public park because people are stealing stuff out of your purse. You're just joking about the fact that in seminary, if you're reading Greek, the word is nigger with a hard G and a hard R.
That's right.
Written down in Greek. And it means something different in that context.
Yeah.
Nigger.
It's the Latin. It's the Latin word for black, right? Like,
so is it referring to another black person?
Yeah, and every Latin language has that. Like, I mean, you see people freaking out about this every year or so. You see some new Twitter minority who's screaming about their kid's box of Crayolas has the word Negro on it.
Right.
It's like, actually, that's just literally the Spanish word for black, and we have it in 3 languages. We have it in French, English, and Spanish.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
Yeah.
And then here's another one. This was from April 11th, 2024. They object to me saying, quote, what this effectively means is that the OPC presbyteries may now remove men from office without judicial process. They've weaponized divestiture for a lack of requisite gifts, close quote. So this was referring to Michael Spangler's situation in the OPC, where they divested him for a lack of requisite gifts. He was not censured. And so they basically just used that as a way to get rid of him so they didn't have a trial. In the report, and I deal with this later in this thread, but in the report, they basically say that, actually it's right here. So the report says that such postings, quote, tarnished the good name of a denomination with which the ARP has fraternal relations, close quote. In other words, they're saying that if any minister in the ARP in any way criticizes the actions of a denomination with which the ARP has fraternal relations, then that is tarnishing that denomination's good name and you are guilty.
Well, that would include then the PCUSA churches there in North Carolina, wouldn't it?
They're not PCUSA. they would say that they're not in fraternal relations with the PCUSA, but they are in fraternal relations.
Unofficial. It's
Is that what it is, right?
unofficial. The cozy feelings that the local church has.
Yeah.
You know,
So you could say, and you could say, of course, they have fraternal relations with other NAPARC churches. So if you're talking about the PCA or whatever it might be, you can't honestly say you're not allowed to criticize those denominations in any way. I mean, even their own ministers criticize them, right? This is not, fraternal relations does not make a denomination immune from criticism. It's
or at
absurd.
least it shouldn't. Yeah, this is that 11th commandment, right? The Baptist.
That's basically the equivalent.
Thou
right?
shalt not.
The Presbyterian equivalent.
Yeah, thou shalt not. What is the word? Criticize. Thou shalt not criticize another Baptist.
That's right.
Well, what's funny about it is, and I've kind of made this joke about Presbyterian church government, about how, like, if you don't like your church, you just make another Presbyterian denomination to avoid Presbyterian church government. But that's a joke. But also, if you agreed with everything in this other denomination, then you would just be part of the same Presbyterian denomination.
That's exactly right.
Obviously, there's something you disagree with somewhere down the line.
That's right. And that doesn't mean you're tarnishing that denomination's name. It's just an honest assessment, and we're free to do that. So that came up with the denominational level, and then I had another post that they mentioned. They mentioned a post from July 30th, 2024, where I say, quote, "This is why your seminaries are fake and gay," close quote. And that was particularly, as I say, here, this was a post commenting on a report that revealed that diversity was listed by ATS as the number one core value. As I say here, if your seminary's number one core value is diversity, then yes, your seminary is fake and gay. And if it doesn't describe your seminary, then you shouldn't take offense at it. So why would they have a problem with me pointing out that seminaries that basically have DEI policies are fake and gay, unless the seminaries that they're supporting have those DEI policies and are fake and gay? It doesn't make any sense. So
I mean, you could have even used stronger language than that. I mean, you could have called them faggy and retarded. Could have, right?
So I like the ring of fake and gay, but that works too.
Yeah, it rolls off the tongue better.
It does.
Yeah. It does.
So ultimately, this was your response. Excuse me. You said, on Saturday, Grace Presbytery, ARPC, decided to take up charges against me based on the investigator's report. I do not intend to participate in any ecclesiastical trial, since the Presbytery has demonstrated that they are exercising illegitimate authority. Right? They're not bringing charges. They're just investigating for the sake of investigating, which I will address below. So here I will defend my name by going through the report in detail. And this is a very thorough explanation on what happened. You talk about the minister and his works committee. You talk about the charge of collapse good order, which we went over. I particularly like this meme that you've got here. So the Presbytery basically said charges, but for upholding the confession. What are the charges? What is the charge? Yeah. Eating a meal, a succulent Chinese meal. This makes the court illegitimate, just as illegitimate as a federal court that claims it will not abide by the very Constitution that establishes its own authority. So for people who are just seeing this for the first time, go to Michael Hunter's Twitter page, Ref Translations, and look through these threads. He's done, I believe, a very thorough job of talking about the issues. What does the report say? Why? Like he said at the beginning, right? He's wanting to demonstrate why he's not going to stand for this trial. And when I look through this, I find nothing but very well-reasoned arguments. Him talking about why he doesn't feel that this is a legitimate court, why they are, they're rejecting the very confession that they claim to hold to for the sake of persecuting a man who holds to the confession that they hold to. It really is cut and dry, just as that. And this, I won't go through this whole post because you go like 50 deep.
I know, yeah. It was an 11-page report, and so I basically tried to include in the sections dealing with the charges, the basis for the charges against me and the particular accusations, virtually all of that verbatim is in that thread. So,
And
It-
what? Go ahead.
Oh, it's so weird to have an 11-page report that doesn't give specific instances of why the report is even made.
well, I mean, those are the specific instances that some of which I mentioned, and the rest of are contained in that thread. The specific instances are those social media posts, right? Things like
Yeah,
that, or
I guess,
my
yeah.
associations with Michael Spangler and the Pactum Institute, or again, as I said, okay, the specific instance is you taught on principles of Presbyterianism, and that created division in the church, and people didn't like it. They also, and I mentioned in the thread that on the floor of Presbytery, the investigator also mentioned that I was at least partly responsible for moving the piano to the back of the church, and so that's the the real.
I mean, the pastor changed the color of the carpet in the sanctuary.
Right, yeah.
Time to throw him out.
Yeah.
I mean, that it really is ludicrous. I mean, and the thing is, when I look through this, Joel Webbin got in some trouble either this last week or the week before for posting on Twitter. He said something along the lines of, well, if a young man has been excommunicated from his church, the odds are that's a sign of good conduct, not bad. And he got a lot of heat for that. And he backpedaled, which is unfortunate. He hemmed and hawed, and he was like, well, what I meant was, but I mean, this is what we're talking about is this rings very familiar for the people who have followed the excommunication and then recommunication of Ryan Turnipseed, who was excommunicated for guilt by association with Stone Choir, people that he's not actually associated with. And, but he refused to denounce them. They brought in Turnipseed and they sat him down and they said, okay, denounce. Sure. And he said, I've never been on their show. They've never been on mine. I have nothing to denounce. I'm not going to do it. They bring you forward and they're like, well, he's friends with Michael Spangler. Denounce. And you're like, well, what did Michael Spangler say or do?
Right.
Well, no, you just have to. We're going to take it as wrote that these people are guilty and you must denounce or else face, in your case, not excommunication, but removal from office.
But even if, let's assume worst case scenario. So let's assume these guys held all sorts of terrible views, unorthodox views. That doesn't mean that I'm guilty of it, right?
Yeah.
A man is to be held accountable for his own words and deeds, and that's what they refuse to do. Is if the issue here is that I hold some unorthodox view that somehow contradicts the Westminster Standards, then just let's deal with that. Let's be open and honest about it. And I think, I could be wrong, but I'm speculating that realistically they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, because they needed somebody to punish in all of this. And their choices were either they could go down the road of dealing with my published views and statements regarding anything, including race. And what they're going to find is that my views, and this, of course, is what the Ministerians Works Committee did when they asked me those questions, is my views are perfectly consistent with the history of Presbyterianism.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do? You're going to say that you don't, you want to bar from office or even excommunicate Charles Hodge, J. Gresham Machen, Francis McAmey, whoever it is. You really want to get rid of those guys? Because that bars you forever from ever citing those guys as theological or spiritual heroes. You don't get to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so they could have gone that route. And I think that maybe perhaps after my answers to the Ministerians Works Committee, they were a little bit scared because they knew where that was going. Because again, I cite from some of those historic Presbyterians throughout my answers. And so I think perhaps they said, okay, we need to go in another direction. And so instead of charging him for any kind of unorthodox views, let's deal with his associations and with his social media posts and being divisive because of what he taught about the principles of Presbyterianism. And then he upset women in the church because of his views on gender and sexual distinctions. Well, once they went that route, once they decided to do it, it's foolish. It looks foolish because it is. It becomes completely absurd. So it was really a no-win situation for them.
I like that you were talking about terrible views, and then you said you'd corrected yourself and said unorthodox. But I think terrible is really what they're actually going after, because they know it's not unorthodox. They know that nothing you're saying is against Scripture or the confession, which I think you had only mentioned before the show. But like, your view of the confession should be that it accurately teaches what is in the Scriptures. So there is no confession versus Bible problem.
There can't be, right? So
No.
for a Presbyterian, we have our subordinate standards, and it literally makes no sense. It is impossible for a Presbyterian minister consistently to say that there is a contradiction between what the confession teaches and scriptural principles, except, of course, yes, ministers can register exceptions, but what they can't do is they cannot deny that the confession's view is the church's official position on what Scripture teaches. And so even if you take an exception, you can't start undermining the confession or propagating some other views. So even in that case, if you're a Presbyterian minister, you're saying that, as far as I'm concerned, the confession is what Scripture teaches according to the church.
Right.
If you don't like that, that's fine. Go to another denomination.
Yeah.
Right.
You're in the wrong place.
Go be a Catholic somewhere else.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, it's crazy because there's so many guys that are being brought up on charges for essentially, you did something that we don't like, that's mean, or it makes me sad, or something like that. But it's like, well, explain why. Because I can understand, like, you could do things that aren't necessarily unorthodox that upset people, right?
Yeah.
But
if you're just being contentious.
Yeah, but even that would be
a violation.
Yeah, that's a violation.
Right, that would be a clear violation. That if you're actively, being contentious, that not seeking reconciliation, but that's clearly not what we were doing.
Yeah. Another thing that always bothers me, and I've talked about this in specifically because I'm LCMS with the Woe and Corey Mailer situations, because it's two distinct situations, but I don't like all of these excommunications where they don't give like a way back in. Because the whole point of kicking someone out of the church is so they'd be like, oh man, I messed up. I really miss the means of grace. I need to go back. So I don't understand, like, have they given you an idea? Well, first of all, are you even technically under discipline, or were you at any?
Yeah, so the investigative report was adopted by the Presbyterian, so they set a date for a trial, which was this past Monday, and I did not attend because, again, I believe that once they adopted that report, it became an illegitimate court. They had no authority to judge anything, and so my father and Michael Spangler and my elder, they did attend just to witness and see firsthand, what was going on, and they did end up imposing censure, but not for what was contained in the report. They imposed censure for me not showing up.
Oh.
And so they rebuked me and they removed me from office, and the pretext or the grounds was, that I did not show up. And but again, the moderator apparently made a big deal at the end about how, because he didn't show up, we'll never know if he was really innocent or guilty. Like, we all knew where this was going, guys,
so
right?
Even in their censure of you, they're admitting that they don't know that you did anything wrong.
Right. Yeah. This was based solely on the fact that I did not show up, not on the basis of even what was contained in the report. And so, so I did have censure imposed on me, but it's not for not showing up. So presumably, I guess in their minds, the way back in would be to apologize for not showing up. And then what becomes of the report and everything in the report? Like, what does that look like?
If you come back and you're like, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa, I should have been there.
I should have been. Was that it? Like, you're gonna?
Then they just drop it and they're like, okay, you're good. You can be a pastor.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, because we know that's not gonna. I doubt it. Yeah, that's not how things are gonna get.
The result of this was not that they excommunicated you.
Yeah.
They removed you from office.
Correct.
Which is
what I had asked for back in October.
In October, when this whole thing started, you said, hey, more or less, and I'm going to editorialize a little bit here.
Sure.
Not to put words in your mouth.
No, that's fine.
But, you said, in essence, I know that you don't like me. Now let me go. I just want to leave. Y'all are really mean. You're not nice to me. And, let me go somewhere else. I'm going to take my toys and I'm going to leave.
Basically,
and they're like, no, can't leave the playground until we have this mock trial. And then you don't show up for the mock trial. They're like, okay, well, then we kick you off the playground.
Yes, basically.
Like, well,
that's in short, yeah.
That's what I wanted.
Now, yeah, and the funny thing was, of course, you're talking about the nature of church discipline is supposed to be in part, to reclaim the offender, right?
Right.
It's supposed to bring about some form of reconciliation. In all of this, other than my advocate, not a single minister up to that trial had called me. Not a single minister in our presbytery had reached out to me to say, I'm concerned for your soul. Let's have a conversation about this. What's going on?
What did you mean by this post?
Right. Like, what did you mean by this? Can you explain that? Can we talk about it? And like expressing genuine concern for my spiritual welfare. And so they'll talk a big game publicly about how, they love me and they want what's in my spiritual good and all of this stuff. And they will go to great lengths to engage in investigation for months and leading to this trial. They'll go through all of that, but you don't take the time to call me or to say, let's go to lunch and talk about this or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm. And they have your phone number, right?
They have my phone number. That seems to suggest to me, I'm easy to contact, or they could send an email just to check in and say, what's going on? Can you explain this to me? Or how are you doing spiritually or whatever? They never did. And so that seems to suggest to me that the entire thing is it's for show.
Yeah.
They're trying to say, well, we're not a racist Presbyterian. We're going to come down hard on this kind of thing. And we're not going to allow someone to say that sort of thing about women or whatever it is. And they're going to crack down on that because they don't want to be associated in any way with it. But
we can't have pastors saying that things are fake and gay.
We can't, right, exactly. We can't have pastors using that language. And so they want to crack down on it, but it's not about my spiritual welfare or their concern for me. Otherwise, I would have received some home calls.
Right. So, Michael, go ahead.
Oh, it's only these kind of, sins with, air quotes that they would even act like this. Like if it was, something like, even like, hey guys, I cheated on my wife and, I've got an illegitimate kid running around or something like that. They wouldn't act like this. Like they'd be like, man, dude, we really, you need to repent. You need to,
there would be
reconciliation. And like, there would be, it would be the attitude of like, women having abortions in the church where they're like, well, you're a victim of this and we need to bring you back and all this. And like, it's, you do a, did we lose him?
We might've lost him, but,
I'm back.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
Again, we apologize folks for, some of the inconveniences. Did you get booted or did you just,
it said sorry. It came up with an error. So sorry, something went wrong. So.
All right. Well, that means that we're next. So
we should get to the question.
Some of these comments.
Yeah.
So let's see. B. Alpaca says, "Always record. Can confirm."
Yeah, he knows firsthand.
If you're ever going to be in something, always record it. And if you feel bad about it, just be forthright and tell them. I am huge. A proponent of recording. I've told people going into things like this, record it. Mord Rumble says, if Spangler's such a pariah, then he should have gone to actual trial and been censured. Since the OPC didn't charge him, no one has a right to treat him as such. In this case, not the OPC, but correct. If they're, again, what is the charge?
Yeah.
John Carter, greetings, gentlemen. Greetings, John. Good to have you. Z, this comes in 4 parts. He says, R.E. contemporaryism in the church. Hooters went bankrupt because you don't need Hooters when there are half-naked women on every street. I think there was more going on.
Yeah, we actually did an episode on that.
Finance, anytime there's money involved, there's corruption involved. So there was more going on there. 2, churches that offer modernity aren't attractive because you don't need to get up early on Sunday to see modernity. That's right. You can do that on Friday night downtown, and it's more fun there. 3, people are attracted to church because it has something you can't get anywhere else. One would hope.
Yeah.
One would wish. 4, see also guitars and PowerPoint presentations. That's right. It's like if what you're trying to recreate in the church is Woodstock, I can probably find better musicians at the local karaoke bar.
Yep.
There's a nice Greek restaurant close to where I live where I'll take the beautiful wife on dates sometimes. And they've always got musicians in there, and they're really good. If that's what I'm after, I don't have to go to church. I can go somewhere that makes a really nice, a really good salmon,
Yep.
And have dinner and a show. Z says, guilty of what? Being based? Here I stand.
That is correct.
Yeah.
That is exactly.
Yeah. Here I stand. I can do no other.
Except be based.
And then says, the penalty for not being present at a meeting is 50 pounds of tobacco. Learned about that one doing genealogy. Happened to my ancestor too. So that's what you need if you want to be reinstated as
50 pounds. Yeah.
Just send
That's
them
a lot of
50
tobacco.
pounds of chaw,
Yeah.
and that you will be a minister in the ARP once more. That's
maybe we could settle for like a couple cartons, and that would be all right.
Dreamer says, what's the percentage of good churches, I wonder? You talking denominationally, nationwide? I mean, there are a lot of heretical churches that are explicitly heretical, entire denominations that are apostate, and there are, there's probably a few good PCUSA churches. There's certainly a lot of good ARP churches, and LCMS, Southern Baptist, Reformed Baptist, if there are some Reformed denominations. I mean, I'm sure there are good churches out there, but it is true. They do seem to be few and far between.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it looks like, sometimes the software plays games with us, but let's see if I can share this. So Michael Spangler had a good write-up, I think, of kind of the outcome of this censure. You talked about you were removed from office, but you were not excommunicated. Important distinction to be made there. He says, some victories God gave in ref translations, that is Michael Hunter's Twitter handle, unjust censure. Rev Hunter,
Oh, we lose him.
That's why we wanted to go to the questions, was because he's coming back. At about the 2-hour mark, it sometimes gets a little squirrely.
Okay, got it.
We were talking before the show a little bit, so that's why it's a little before the 2-hour mark. But Sean, you're next, so be ready on your trigger. All right. He says, Reverend Hunter is now free from his persecutors, and he has a good conscience from his faithful witness. Right? He was censured, removed from the pastorate, but not excommunicated. Nothing that he said they found to be heretical. 2, God himself rebuked the Presbytery by previously exposing the hypocrisy of Hunter's chief persecutor, a minister who had, and there is a correction to be done here, but who had been having some sort of affair with his church pianist, by their reading of our church's letters and by the speeches of their own presbyters, who in this proceeding and the prior meeting expressed their shock that he was being persecuted for upholding Presbyterian and Reformed doctrine. Now, I don't want to dig into this too deep because you don't want to be airing dirty laundry, but that prosecutor, from what seems to be being said, was not having a full blown sexual relationship, but there was sexual contact of some sort, and we'll just leave it at that. Was I on 2 or 3? 3. 2 presbyters pleaded for a somewhat lighter censure, which was defeated by 1 vote. So even not excommunication, but simply on the pastorate, 2 presbyters were pleading for a lighter censure, and it was defeated by 1 vote. So this was a close thing. This was not unanimous, Michael being booted from the denomination. This was a very close thing. One expressed his desire to see a bridge built for a future peaceful relationship. One might say, like the relationship of the prosecutor, who, they seem to be being much kinder to him than they're being to Michael. Another recognized that our church was as a city of refuge for Reverend Hunter. So talking about his own church. What is the name of Spangler's church again? It's
Piedmont Presbyterian.
Piedmont Presbytery. The same letter asked, how long do we keep harassing him? So even the people who are prosecuting him can see that this is a harassment campaign. The moderator of the Presbytery asserted that our church, meaning Spangler's, though not part of the denomination, was a true part of the visible Church of Christ. So they're not saying, he's leaving our church for some heretical sect. This is all legitimate. At this meeting, not one word was said by any presbyter against Christian nationalism, race realism, or kinism, which race realism and kinism and Christian nationalism are all distinct things for those who are not familiar. The charges read did not name any of these things, despite the fact that at the prior meeting, at least one presbyter was quite upset at this omission. So the fact that, it's hard to prove a negative like this, but the fact that they're not bringing that up probably means something. Yep. Reverend Hunter is and remains part of the church that sees through this illegitimate and unjust act, is happy to receive his membership and ministry, and will continue to witness him against such corruption and hypocrisy. And I will add, to receive the means of grace. So he's in a church in good standing. This trial has put on display the faithfulness of countless friends online and in real life, and of Reverend Hunter's parents, whose love for their son was evident throughout. His father attended all his presbytery meetings, stood by his son, and even brought bold private rebukes to presbyters. And 8, finally, this seems to me a signal of turning tide. The present churches are on notice and can no longer oppress good men so freely. Such men have learned to stand, not cower, even to righteously defy church tyranny. I have some hope that more will follow Reverend Hunter in his faithful witness, and that through raising up many more such men, Christ will reform his church. So, Spangler is an absolute Chad, and him coming in and standing by you is a wonderful example of what a brother should do.
Oh yeah.
We saw a similar things have happened multiple times. Thomas Accord was persecuted, not because people hated Thomas Accord, but because they hated Wolfe. Stephen Wolfe wrote a book on Christian nationalism, which I have right here. It's a good book. Buy it, read it. These people couldn't find a problem with Wolfe's book, so they went after Thomas because he had some tweets that were a bit spicy, and some that he's even said, he regrets. But this is the guilt by association. This is the persecution of good, faithful men inside the church by the church rulers. The Pharisees, who are supposed to be protecting and carrying the word of God to the people of God, God's chosen people, and instead they oppress them. But do not do as they do, but instead do the works that they, purportedly do. Like Jesus said of the Pharisees, do the good works, but do not do as they do, because they are whitewashed tombs. Unfortunately, that is very common. So very, very glad to see, hopefully this is coming to an end. How do you stand now that all this is said and done? We've mentioned a couple times that you're a member in good standing at Piedmont Presbytery, which is, Michael Spangler's church. But how do you stand situationally now?
With regard to my ecclesiastical status, the presbytery or the commission at the trial last Monday, or that meeting last Monday, they did something that was unusual as far as I can tell, and they basically decided to assume, simply just to assume, that I was a member of the last ARP church which I had attended. And
Before
so
Covenant of Grace.
No, this was so after I left Covenant for a very brief period. I was attending the ARP church, the pastor of which became my advocate.
Gotcha.
And so I was at his church and then started attending Spangler's. And so that they assumed, they just, again, no motion, they just assumed that I was a member of that church. And so my understanding is that as far as they're concerned, the next step would be to seek a transfer of membership from that church to Michael Spangler's. But again, Spangler's church wrote a letter to the Presbytery indicating that they had already decided to receive me into membership. So I am now being regarded as a minister or member of Piedmont Presbyterian Church.
So it's a done deal.
It's a done deal.
They assigned you to this other church. That other church has let you go, and Garrett, or not, Spangler has been happy to receive you to his church. So you're in a church, you're in a local church receiving the means of grace. You can wash your hands of them, and you are not their problem anymore.
That's correct. I have no relationship whatsoever. I do not have any connection to the Presbytery now. That is in my rearview mirror, and I am, my advocate. When he called me about the results of last Monday's meeting, he told me, he said, "Free at last, free at last." Thank God Almighty, you're free at last. So yes, so I am free.
All right. All right. Let's see.
Z had a comment and then in the chat. It was pretty funny.
Yeah, so he says, "Oh, I forgot. I had the stream going at the gas pump with the windows down. The Zoomer pumping gas next to me visibly perked up when you said Longhouse. The kids know." That's right.
Indeed.
That's right. It's it's so short-sighted. You're talking earlier about how these people, they don't want you to be the pastor because you're seemingly driving the people out of the church and you're just too controversial. But, we shouldn't be organizing ourselves by the zeitgeist, by what is popular. But even if that was what you did, one would be able to look around and see, the young people are rejecting liberalism. They're rejecting the liberalism in the church. They're looking for a return to tradition. They're looking for a return to something foundational. They want to hear the scriptures. They want to receive the means of grace. They want to sing hymns and psalms that sound like they're marching into battle.
Yeah.
They want something to live for. And for these old people, and I'm going to say boomers, yes, by and large, boomers, who have this problem with people, young people who are to their right, at some point you're going to have to relinquish the reins. Just practically speaking, you're not going to be here forever. And this thing that we see where the boomers are clinging to the cliff with blue fingernails, we see this in local governments too, right? Every local Republican Party is just full of boomers, and you'll get some young radicals who come in and they're like, "Hey, let's outlaw abortion. Hey, let's restrict the franchise to people who are net contributors, not on welfare." These are things I've seen people in our local politics come in. Hey, let's take a stand as a city or as a county against the promotion of Islam. And the boomers get up on their high horse and they screech and they cry and they throw a hissy fit about how that's not the American way and that's not the liberal way. They don't use that word, but that is essentially what it is. It's liberal dogma. And, if they were forward looking, even if they're basing it just on numbers, I mean, we're talking about a dying church, and this is not to reflect badly on ARP or Covenant of Grace, but when you've got a church that's 80 or 90 members, and they're having conniptions about a young pastor who's talking to the world at large and saying, look at your sins, look at the way that you're living, what you're doing is not good. That's what people want to hear. There's a political commentator that I like listening to. He has a podcast, The Lotus Eaters, which is about primarily British politics, but he covers a lot of American politics too. The guy's an atheist, and he talks about, I'm an atheist, but I'm a Protestant. I go to church about 2 or 3 times a year, and I just hate it because I get in there and they're all gay affirming and they're all, we want the migrants and we want to love the Muslims. And he's like, no, I want to go to church and I want to hear you talk about my sins. I want you to tell me that I'm going to hell and I want to feel bad about it. And this is coming from an atheist, a guy who doesn't believe that there is a God, but even he knows what church is actually for. Just from, a societal perspective. He's looking at it just from, what can church do for us as a society? And yet the people who are in the church, who are running the church, don't want the church to fill that role that God gave her.
No, yeah, I think that's right. I think that, it's, again, as I said earlier, it is short-sighted to look at a situation where the average age of a congregant in the ARP is 65 years old, and you have all of these Gen Z young men who are more right-wing than anybody else, and they're interested in the Christian faith, and they're going out and they're buying Bibles and driving up Bible sales, and you're seriously going to look at that situation where there's a hunger for this, and you're going to turn these young men away, and you're going to say, well, okay, we just don't want you here. It's bizarre to me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have to say, I'm very encouraged to see that you have ended up at Michael Spangler's church. I love stories like that, man, where it doesn't work out for whatever reason in another church and you can go somewhere else and just...
Yeah, providentially, it's amazing to me in a relatively short period that a lot has happened in the past 6 months. And, Spangler he's started this new church. He has lots of ambitious plans for the various ministries that are now underway. And none of that would have happened if he had not... If things had not gone at Covenant the way they did. And so what seemed to have been a terrible thing, and I told this, I was talking to my advocate, when we were still dealing with the Presbytery stuff, that the Presbytery's fear was Michael Spangler. Spangler would never have had the kind of influence and path forward that he now has if they had not acted the way they did. They got the exact opposite of what they had intended. They made him a bigger influence, not a smaller one. And so I just think that's ironic. It's ironic how things turned out, but it's also the Lord is doing something, it seems, and in all of this with now Piedmont Presbyterian. And I can't say just at a personal level, for whatever differences we might have, I have better friends than I deserve. And Spangler is one of them. There's nobody quite like him. I've never met someone who has that kind of pastoral concern and heart that he does. He's just it's good to have him as a friend.
Yeah, no man is poor who has friends. That's right. So we're beyond the 2-hour limit now, but wanted to go over just one more thing. So for those of you who are interested in some of the work that Michael Hunter has done, like we mentioned before, he's a very well-educated man, and he's done some translation work, and he's been translating things from Latin into English so that the hoi polloi, so to speak, can get their hands on some of the older writings. A lot of theological books from the past were written in Latin. not necessarily by native Latin speakers, but it was commonplace for people who had an education to discourse in Latin. And now that we live in a society where that is not the case, where English has sort of taken over from Latin and French as the language of discourse, some of those works have been hard to find. So there is this book here, The Marrow of Christian Ethics, which I, excuse me, I listened to a podcast episode that you did with Cody Justice and if you'll forgive me, got a little bit of a cold, and Michael Spangler.
By the way, just not to interrupt you, but both of those gentlemen told me to tell you both hi. So,
yeah, nice, awesome.
So I just, of course, I was worshiping with them, so I saw them both today. So
awesome, fantastic. But talking about The Marrow of Christian Ethics, this is a book by Benedict Pictet. If you want to give us just a quick rundown of this book, it's available on Prime or on Amazon, hardcover 35, paperback 25. It's not a big book. It's 341 pages, right? You could read that in a day or two. But give us the rundown on this. What is this book and what is it about?
So, as the name suggests, it's The Marrow of Christian Ethics is a short, relatively, again, as you noted, a relatively short summary of Christian ethics, and it's written in a question and answer format like a catechism. He has a longer work in French that basically expands on the same content, and so these are just the basics, the core components. And he starts off, he discusses the meta-ethical issues, some fundamental issues behind Christian ethics, and then he goes on and he deals with our ethical obligations and duties toward God and toward our neighbor and then toward ourselves. And then he deals eventually with the emotions, these basically springs of action. So he's dealt with all of the obligations that we have, but behind all of those obligations and our fulfillment of them lies our emotional position or disposition. And so he discusses all of the various emotions that drive us and how to think about them biblically. And then in the last section, he deals with some particular applications depending on a person's state in life and vocation. So, for example, the particular duties of a parent or a child or a husband or a wife or a doctor or a lawyer, whoever it might be. And so it's basically a summary of some Christian ethical categories that's useful, I think, for devotional purposes. It's useful to just help us to think about what our obligations are and how we understand our own emotional states and the sources of our action.
Fantastic. Yeah, so a good reading. I'll have to get my hands on a copy of this. I'll add it to the stack of books that I need to read. There's not enough time in the world to read all the books that I want to read, but this one's definitely going on the pile. Are you going to be doing more work like this, translation work in the future?
I hope so. I have a number of projects that are at various stages of completion, and in addition to the translation work, I've got a few articles that I would like to complete, and then there's a longer project that I think will be some years out, which is about R.L. Dabney and his work. So. Yeah. I'm working on that, and then I would like to try to crank out some more translations, perhaps, maybe this year, a couple this year. We'll see.
Yeah, well, we are definitely Dabney appreciators. I
hope so. I got a Dabney book right here. It's a Stonewall Jackson biography.
Yeah, his biography. Yeah.
We are Dabney appreciators here.
Good. Is that Garris's book?
This is Garris's book, Zachary Garris, Dabney on Fire. It's essentially four different writings on Dabney. You've got parental responsibilities, secularized education, women's rights women, and civic ethics. It's like, so if you're looking for some good Dabney, we've got recommendations there.
Yeah, here's my Dabney that I
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A Defense of Virginia and through
That's
her.
with the full title on it. Not
That was
just
actually that was actually the first book of his that I ever read.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm more of a Confederacy guy than a Presbyterian theology guy. So this was, of course, I was like, well, I've got to read this.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
right.
yeah.
That's right.
One day we'll have to do a episode on just this book, because all the time people are like, could you just give me a summary? And I'm like, dude, it's so much.
It's a good book. Yeah, it's a really good.
It's
not to go off topic, but not to go too far off topic. But you mentioned Garris and Dabney. Of course, you know, I think Garris has a book coming out later this year, dealing with some Southern Presbyterian thought. So I'm really looking forward to that.
I just got his book, Honor Thy Fathers. Haven't gotten into that one yet. It's on the stack of books to read, but that one was published by the Ogden guys.
That's right. Yeah.
I tell you what, these guys did some beautiful work. And as a book lover and appreciator, you know, it's got a good dust cover on it, which every book needs a dust cover but just the beauty of these things, good quality. I mean, it's fantastic. Some of the things that we're seeing come out here, and I'm perfectly honestly excited to reclaim our heritage as heritage Americans, as Reformed Christians, to see some of these books coming back into the limelight, and to see the ideas that our fathers wrote about being brought forward again. It's a revival. It's a real revival, and I wish the boomers wouldn't resent it so much. It is what it is, I guess.
It is.
As far as the work that you're doing, you know, translations and such, if we want to follow that, what's the best way to do that? Are you doing most of your work through anybody, or is it mostly independent? Do you have a website, or just follow you on Twitter?
So the best place to follow me is on Twitter or X, or whatever people are calling it these days. And as far as the you know, publishing, I the last book I self-published, you know, through Amazon, and previously I had published some translation work through Reformation Heritage. And so going forward, I think it really depends on the project. And now it seems that there is this, you know, growing number of smaller publishers that are willing to maybe publish material that more mainstream publishers have not been willing to publish. And so it might be a good idea, I think, to go through those avenues, but we'll see.
All right.
We'll have to sometime get you and our last guest together and talk about, because we were just talking about the differences between the Latin Vulgate and the Masoretic Hebrew, and that was a whole last episode. So.
Yeah, and the Septuagint discussion, all of that's becoming a hot topic.
We'll have to get a whole round table go on.
And you know, as a guy who only reads and speaks predominantly English, you know, when you've got Latin and Greek and Hebrew all going against each other, you know, three languages that I've very little experience in. I dabble in a little bit of Latin, but really nothing. It's kind of like when people hear that I speak German, they're like, oh, well, can you translate this book for me? And I'm like, that's you know, translating works is a little bit more complicated, you know, talking about things that are, you know, medical or theological or mechanical in nature is a whole nother realm.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, there are lots of people who speak English, but if you ask them about what's wrong with your car, they don't have the vocabulary to describe it.
Yep.
You know, everyone in America predominantly speaks English, but if you start talking about medical issues, you know, there's going to be a lot of words that they don't know.
Right.
And, you know, that particularity is a special kind of education. And we really appreciate the people like yourself, like Joseph Weisman, people who are able to read these languages, but at a high level, where they understand the theological significance of particular terms. So definitely looking forward to any work that you have coming along to put that into the common vernacular of the English-speaking man.
Well, thank you. I'll do my best.
All right. Okie doke. Well, folks, it has been 2 hours and coming up on 15 minutes. We appreciate those of you who've stuck around. If there's anybody in the waiting that has one last question they want to ask real quick, or one quick aspersion, if you want to get your digs in, now's your moment. I'm going to give you a few seconds. But Sean, did you have any final questions or final things you wanted to say?
No, I think I've said everything.
All right. Okay. Well, I'm not seeing anybody in the chat, but we hope that most of our viewers are second day viewers. The commute to and from work on Monday morning. So
Sure.
we definitely appreciate you coming on. I think this has been a wonderful discussion, just to get the problems out in the open, to find out what happened, what is the result of it all. And, really just very thankful to God that this did not go a different way. Because, I'm not a Presbyterian, but I know Presbyterians by reputation.
Sure.
And they drag things out.
Yeah.
When something happens, they're like, we're getting to it, but there's a whole process involved. And in your case, that took a year and a half, from kind of the start of it in late 2023, and is just now seemingly resolved. And that doesn't mean that there won't be some people dredging up things and trying to make trouble for you later, but that is a continuing problem. But we definitely are glad to see that you're in a good situation, and we'll definitely be keeping you in prayer. And the whole situation with the new church and their foundation, that God provides them with safety, for one thing, but also that he brings people to that establishment, and brings leaders who can lead those people, shepherd them in the way that is right. So we're very appreciative for you coming on, man.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me. This has been fun.
Absolutely. All right. Well, folks, it is late. It is probably time for y'all to be going to bed. So tomorrow's a day that God has prepared for us good works to do in. So get some rest. Hope you have enjoyed the show. Thank you for sticking along as long as you did. And hope you have a wonderful rest of your Lord's Day and a wonderful rest of your week. And farewell.